Hello there and welcome to the Sleepy Alchemist. Tonight we drift along Venetian canals, their waters dark as ink, mirroring a sky embroidered with stars. The hush of gondolas brushing against mooring posts is broken only by the occasional clink of glass. And that is where our story begins. You're about to step into the midnight world of a blind glassblower named Elio, a man whose work whispers secrets and purifies poison, though he never sees a drop of what's poured in. You probably want to know this. Elio's flasks don't just look pretty, they change things, not always in ways you expect. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while we're settling in, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing whose dreams I'm visiting. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Elio wakes before the sun rises. Though he never sees it, his workshop is already warm, the stone floor beneath his bare feet gently radiating heat from the banked furnace. He moves through the space with the precision of someone who's memorized every surface. The shelves of silica, potash, manganese, and strange things like powdered garnet and thistle ash, he can find each without hesitation. In a city where the Doge's secret police once silenced glassmakers who fled to rival countries, Elio lives quietly, unnoticed, just another old man with cataract-clouded eyes and singed sleeves. But when he blows into his pipe and shapes the molten glass, there's something else at play. The curves he makes don't follow typical Venetian forms. They're thinner, stronger, and eerily responsive to what's poured into them. He's always said little about his work, except for one cryptic phrase he repeats to the few customers who wander in from the side alley near Campo San Barnaba: "The glass remembers." You may not, but it does. Today the shop is empty but for the soft cooing of pigeons outside and the flicker of firelight playing through the small stained glass window shaped like an eye. It's in this half-silence that Elio begins shaping a new piece, a flask with a double neck, sealed with what feels like a tear-shaped stopper. Venice in the 17th century had a strange rhythm, like a watch ticking underwater. Behind the grandeur of St. Mark's Basilica and the masked elegance of Carnival, there was fear, not just of plague or pirates or papal spies, but of knowledge. You see, Venice once boasted a secret code of laws forbidding glassmakers from leaving Murano Island. Why? Because the Republic feared other nations would learn to make glass as pure, as clear, as spellbinding. Murano was the Silicon Valley of its day, only instead of apps, they blew miracles from fire. And Elio? He was the ghost no one saw walking among them. Despite his blindness, he senses when something is about to change. The furnace burns differently that morning. The flame, normally a low growl, whispers. A breeze no one invited flutters the pages of an old ledger in the back. He smells lavender and salt water, like perfume masked with brine. He finishes the flask, sets it aside, and then waits. You should know this about Elio. He was never formally apprenticed after his return to the mainland. People say his eyes were lost in a furnace flash, but that's only half true. Historians still argue whether his blindness was divine punishment for working with the outlawed Alkahest Society, or simply the cost of tampering with substances not meant for human hands. He never denies either version. He just smiles, glassy-eyed. A fringe belief held by some antique scholars claims that certain artisans, blind to light, could perceive vibrations through heat, making them, paradoxically, more precise glassmakers than their sighted peers. Elio, of course, would never say that aloud. He's too amused by how loudly people talk when they think you can't see their lips move. That night, the bell on his door jingles. Not once, but twice. Then once again, an old signal. 3 rings, 2 fast, 1 slow. Elio freezes, his glass cane clinking against a stool as he steadies himself. That code hadn't been used since before the Doge banned alchemical gatherings in the city. Back when he was still known by another name, when he wore copper spectacles and stirred seawater with glass rods inscribed in Hebrew, Latin, and Arabic. Whoever is outside knows. He walks to the door with care, fingers brushing the worn grooves in the wood, memorized over years. He doesn't open it immediately. Instead, he presses his fingers to the lower panel, where once a hidden slot held contraband scrolls. empty now. Then he opens the door. A gust of wind follows the figure inside, a person wrapped in a thick oilcloth cloak, their face obscured but not their posture. Confident, tall, limping slightly, they remove a bundle from their satchel, carefully wrapped in linen. When Elio touches it, his breath hitches. Glass, shattered, familiar weight. But it's not just any broken flask, it's one of his, one he hadn't seen in nearly 5 decades. One he had believed lost during the burning of the Scuola dei Vapori, the hidden guild hall of the Alcahest Society. The visitor speaks only one word, low and deliberate. Caligo. Elio drops the linen. The name echoes like a snapped lute string in his chest. Caligo was not a person, not a place. It was a project, a recipe, an obsession. And perhaps it was the reason his mentor died. He doesn't ask questions, not yet. Instead, he picks up the broken flask again and traces its jagged edge with a practiced hand. He will need fire tonight, and memory, because secrets like glass only reveal themselves under heat and pressure. Rain tap-taps on the tiled roof as Elio places the broken flask on a velvet pad. The stranger stands silent, close enough that Elio can smell wet wool and the faintest note of bergamot, an upper market cologne, not common in this part of Venice. He doesn't ask who the visitor is. Not yet. Instead, he listens to the air shift around the flask, the way moisture gathers on the fractured glass edges. He runs his fingertips over the contours, murmuring, "One of mine, yes, but you knew that." The stranger doesn't respond. "You used it?" Elio asks softly. A pause. Then, "I wasn't the first. It passed through many hands. The last one poured truth into it, and died before the truth came out." Elio almost smiles. That's the thing about his flasks. They don't just purify, they reflect. And sometimes what you see is more dangerous than what was hidden. "You said Caligo," he murmurs. "Why?" The stranger hesitates again, then steps forward. With a rustle of cloak and an audible thump, they drop a second item on the workbench, a leather-bound notebook, warped with age, scorched at the edges. Elio runs his hands over the cover. The ridges and scorches form a familiar pattern. The 7-star sigil, his throat tightens. "This shouldn't exist anymore. It survived," the stranger says. "Like you did." The rain grows heavier outside, as if punctuating the moment. From the street below, a gondolier curses at the rising tide, and Elio briefly imagines the lagoon swelling with secrets, just waiting to wash them all away. The notebook, now damp with his breath and trembling fingers, contains what's left of Project Caligo, a collaboration he abandoned long ago. The goal had been simple in theory, to create a vessel and a liquid that together could strip away all falsehoods, both from what was spoken and from the very essence of a person's memories. But the method? Dangerous, forbidden, based on a process found not in the tidy diagrams of modern science, but whispered across medieval borders from Jewish Kabbalists in Cordoba to Sufi chemists in Alexandria to monks who'd smuggled texts from Byzantium. He remembers one recipe in particular, seawater mixed with crushed sapphire, honeyed lead, and something much harder to find, the breath of fireless flame. Still debated by historians, that phrase has never been conclusively translated. Some think it's metaphor for a gas. Others argue it's a lost spiritual practice. And then there are the fringe theorists who claim it refers to the voice of a dying man, captured in glass as he takes his final breath. Either way, it was not meant for polite society. Elio sighs. "You want me to repair the flask?" The stranger shifts. "I want you to remember how it works." It's a cold ask. Memory costs more than materials. Still, Elio reaches for his tools. Venice once prided itself on its glassmakers, true artisans who turned flame and minerals into objects that rivaled gemstones. In fact, one historical fact often lost to tourists is that during the 15th and 16th centuries, Venetian glass was so prized, nobles were buried with their goblets as if they were relics. In contrast, fringe beliefs held that some of these goblets contained the souls of their drinkers, especially if shattered during a toast. Elio wonders whether the stranger believes in souls. Probably not. He warms the flask's jagged edges under a low flame, listening for how the cracks breathe. Every fracture tells a story. This one cracked under pressure, but not thermal, emotional perhaps. A violent revelation. He chuckles under his breath. It screamed when it broke. Pardon? He shrugs. Glass has a voice. When it shatters from grief, it sounds different than rage. This one wept. For the first time, the stranger seems unsettled. Elio turns toward the rear shelves, running his fingers along tiny labeled jars. One by one, he gathers what he needs: powdered bone ash, dragon's blood resin, and a curious blend of oxidized silver and crushed garnet. He knows the recipe not from books, but from touch memory, a map etched into his mind like grooves in an old vinyl. He speaks while working, more to himself than the stranger. We tried to make something honest. Once. Too honest. Turned people inside out. Thought it would cleanse, but it revealed. Isn't that what you wanted? The stranger asks. Elio pauses. Only until we saw what truth really looks like. That was the mistake. Alchemy didn't fail because the science was wrong. It failed because humans lie even to themselves, especially to themselves. Outside, a thunderclap rolls across the Grand Canal. Somewhere near the fish market, a crate topples, scattering eels across the stones. Elio smiles at the chaos he can't see but feels in the vibration of the floorboards. He places the repaired flask into the annealing chamber, a brick-lined oven meant to cool the glass slowly, preventing future cracks. It will take hours, days even. But it's not the flask that needs mending. It's the knowledge, and knowledge doesn't cool quickly. The stranger lingers, saying nothing. Elio finally speaks, voice low. I need to ask you a question. Of course. Who are you to speak the word Caligo? The visitor pulls back the hood. Elio can't see the face, but he hears the breath catch. A scent, a bitter clove notes in the air, tickles memory. You're not who I thought, he murmurs. No, the stranger says. I'm worse. There's a long silence between them, broken only by the tiny cracks forming in the cooling flask. And you're not the only one who wants the elixir, the stranger adds. Others are looking. For you. For it. For what's left. Elio sighs, then nods toward the upstairs chamber. The guest room hasn't been used in years. Unless you count pigeons. You can stay the night. I'll stand watch. How noble, Elio mutters, already retreating to his corner chair, where an old cushion and a warm teacup wait. But let me warn you, truth is rarely noble, and the flask, it doesn't care about who asks, it only answers. As the workshop dims, the repaired flask cools behind the annealing bricks, and outside, Venice exhales another secret into the lagoon. Elio wakes before the stranger does. He always does. The house breathes like a living thing in the hours before dawn. Rafters creak from the previous day's warmth. Pigeons shuffle on the windowsill, and far off, bells echo across the Grand Canal, though their timing is notoriously untrustworthy. The glassblower sits quietly in the kitchen alcove, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic cup filled with fennel tea, brewed more out of habit than thirst. The flask is still cooling. It hums faintly from behind the annealing bricks. Only Elio seems to hear it. Or perhaps he just knows what to listen for. Glass never lies, but it also never forgets. That's what no one understands. He swirls his tea, steam brushing the base of his chin, and begins to remember. There was a time, decades ago, when the idea of turning seawater into truth had been more than a thought experiment. It had been a mission. And Elio, a boy of barely 15, had been the guild's youngest member. Orphaned during a merchant feud over trade routes, Elio had been left on the steps of the Scuola dei Battuti, a brotherhood known more for its charitable parades than child-rearing. Still, they'd fed him, clothed him, and eventually passed him off to a monastery on San Michele Island, where old monks claimed to see something useful in his eyes. That something turned out to be patience, and a deep fascination with fire. It wasn't long before one monk, Father Domenico, smuggled him into the deeper layers of the monastery, past the herbs and prayer beads and Latin chants, into the cellars where dusty furnaces sat unused. This at least publicly. You see, long before Venice made its glassmakers a guarded industry, monks across Italy had experimented with mineral manipulation. They were the first to create crocus martis, oxidized iron used to treat wounds, and some, like Father Domenico, believed that God's true language could be found not in scripture, but in the crystalline lattice of things that held light. Elio had never seen him write a single sermon, but the man could boil copper and not flinch. "You stir it like prayer," the monk once said. Same rhythm, different revelations. That line stuck with Elio, even years later. Historians still argue whether these monastic cellars were part of a larger network known as the Alkahest Society, or if that name was invented centuries later by conspiracy theorists in dusty lecture halls. Some say the term comes from Paracelsian text referencing the universal solvent. Others believe it was a loose alliance of rogue thinkers who drifted between religious orders and artisan guilds, testing limits, blurring lines. Whatever it was, it didn't have a building or banners. But it did have a project, and that project had a name. Caligo, fog, fitting, isn't it? Elio had been initiated, not with fanfare, but with a glass rod placed in his palm during midnight mass. The elder had whispered, not to see, but to reveal. Then they handed him a boiled leather scroll containing symbols he couldn't yet read. He didn't sleep for 3 days after that. By 16, he could recite the principles of alchemical infusion in 3 languages. Not because he was a prodigy, but because he was terrified of being left behind. Those early experiments were crude. Simple seawater collected from near the Lido, strained through layers of powdered pearl and fig ash. Nothing happened at first. Then, in one lucky accident, a flask fogged when held too long in bare hands. The fog formed letters. Names. Not every attempt worked, but the implications. Frightening. They'd made a liquid that responded to guilt, or maybe intent. They called it the elixir of reflection. Though elixir was generous, it tasted like despair and rusted copper. Still, when tested on prisoners offered freedom in exchange for cooperation, the results were undeniable. A sip, and their confessions tumbled out, sometimes unrelated, sometimes devastatingly specific. The monks said it was divine intervention. The secular chemists said it was psychoreactive transmutation. Elio didn't say anything. He just took notes. And then there was the first death. Brother Cadro, a former physician turned flask smith, collapsed mid-experiment, choking on his own breath. When they broke open his last notes, they found sketches of a new flask shape, one eerily similar to the double-necked vessel Elio would one day remake. The theories abound. Some believed Cadro was silenced by the Inquisition. Others said his own elixir turned on him. A more fringe theory proposed the glass captured the last truth. Cadro refused to speak and held it so tightly it broke his lungs trying to escape. Elio was 17 when he fled Murano. That story, though, was for another day. From upstairs the stranger stirs. Elio hears the familiar thump of boots on hardwood. He doesn't turn his head, but says, "There's bread and fig jam on the sill. You'll have to find the knife yourself." A moment of silence. "Is it true?" the stranger asks. "What they say, that you spoke to molten glass?" Elio chuckles. "I didn't speak. I listened." The stranger chews slowly, clearly watching him. What happened to the others? Elio leans back in the chair, tilting his head toward the cooling chamber behind the bricks. Some died. Some vanished. One betrayed us all. Who? "I'll tell you," he says. Once the flask sings again, the stranger frowns. It sings? Elio nods. When it's ready, the glass lets out a tone. Not loud, not obvious, but like a wine glass when stroked just right. A soft note. It means the truth inside has stabilized. The stranger doesn't reply, perhaps sensing that too many questions too early would yield nothing. The rain has stopped now, and the sun begins its shy rise across the lagoon, painting the sky in a pale wash of apricot and ash. Gondoliers start their morning grumbles, and somewhere a fishmonger curses his own lateness. Elio stands with a small grunt. The flask will be ready by sunset, and tonight it will be tested, but not in this house. No, Elio has someone he needs to see, someone he swore never to face again, a name that tastes like metal. The man who once called himself Brother Lucien. Elio wraps the flask in black silk, tucking it into the folds of his satchel like a priest hiding relics from thieves. The stranger watches him work, but doesn't interrupt. It's clear by now that Ilio moves at his own pace, slower than necessary, deliberate, like he's talking to the tools with every motion. He lifts his cane, taps the floor twice, and says simply, "We're going to Murano." The stranger stiffens. "Is that wise?" "No," Il replies, "but it's necessary." The two step out into a day that smells like wet stone and salt. The canals glisten under low-hanging fog, and the gondoliers are already out, poling silently through the water like they're escorting ghosts. Venice never really wakes up. It just shifts from one dream into another. Illo walks without hesitation. Each street corner, each tilted step in the pavement, is etched into his memory. He knows the rhythms of the city by sound, the way footsteps echo under the archways near Campo Santa Margherita, or how the smell of chestnut paste fades near the bakeries by San Polo. They reach a pier where a small vaporetto boat awaits, its driver barely looking up from a cigarette. "Two for Murano," the stranger says, and the boatman nods without comment. As the boat rumbles forward, parting the misty water, Elio exhales slowly. The flask sits nestled against his side, warm now, almost pulsing. "You said you knew Brother Lucian," the stranger says. Elio tilts his head. "Knew is generous. Survived near is more accurate." The stranger waits. "He was one of the lead chemists." Elio continues. "Not a monk, not officially, but he wore the robes when it suited him. Always talking about divine resonance. The voice of the divine in base matter. Said if we listened close enough, we could hear God apologizing through every drop of seawater. That sounds eccentric." Elio snorts. That was him on a sober day. They pass under an archway lined with pigeons, and beyond it, Murano emerges like a reflection from an old dream. It's smaller than Venice, less crowded, but it holds a sharper edge, the kind of place where windows always seem to be watching, where nothing is loud, but everything is known. Murano is home to one of the oldest glassmaking centres in Europe. In fact, by 1291, the Venetian Republic had ordered all glassmakers to relocate here to protect the city from fires, and more importantly, to isolate the secrets of the trade. This made Murano not just a place of craft, but a place of containment. Ideas lived here, and sometimes died here too. Elio steps off the boat with no ceremony, tapping his way down the dock. "It hasn't changed," he mutters. "Still smells like burned ambition." The stranger follows him down narrow alleys lined with crumbling stucco. At the end of one, half covered by ivy and a poorly carved cherub, is a sealed door with a rusted brass knocker. Elio knocks once, waits, knocks twice more. A slit opens, a voice rasps. "Password." Elio doesn't hesitate. "Verdaccio." The door creaks open. They step into darkness, the air thick with resin and soot. The room beyond is dimly lit by blue glass lanterns, suspended from chains like jellyfish. Tables covered in alchemical debris, half-filled flasks, old crucibles, a stuffed raven wearing spectacles, line the walls, and there, hunched over a basin of bubbling liquid that glows faintly green, is Brother Lucien. He hasn't aged so much as curdled. His skin is pale, like he's been storing himself in a jar. Tufts of silver hair stick out from under a cap that might once have been part of a Benedictine robe. When he turns, his eyes are far too bright. "Elio," he croaks. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet," Elio replies flatly. Lucien peers at the stranger. "And this? An observer?" Elio says. "Don't worry, they won't understand half of it." Lucien laughs, the kind of laugh that's sharp at the edges. "Ah, same as always." He gestures to the table. "Well, sit. Let's lie to each other until the truth leaks out." They don't sit. Instead, Elio places the wrapped flask on the table. Lucien's expression changes. He doesn't reach for it, doesn't even blink. "I thought this was lost in the fire," Lucien whispers. "You know it wasn't a fire," Elio says softly. "You know exactly what happened." Lucien sighs, still clinging to that. "Are we? Because it's true." Historians still argue whether the Scuola dei Vapori burned due to a chemical accident or was deliberately destroyed by the Venetian Inquisition. One particularly persistent theory even claims the Doge himself ordered it silenced after rumors that the society had created a liquid truth serum capable of unraveling state secrets. Lucian brushes dust off a scroll. You didn't come here to rehash old guilt. So why did you come? I need the original infusion ratios, Elio replies. The seawater transmutation formula, the real one. Lucian's eyes narrow. It was incomplete. You know that. No, Elio says. You said it was incomplete. Just before Brother Cadro choked on his own tongue. The air tenses. The bubbling in the basin slows, as if even the liquid is eavesdropping. Lucian steps back. You think I don't think. I remember, but memory needs proof. Lucian stares at the flask, his voice dropping. And you want to recreate it? Elio nods. One last time. The old chemist laughs, though it's a joyless sound. You never did learn to leave well enough alone. No, Elio says, because truth never leaves me alone. Lucian walks to a cabinet, opens it, pulls out a vial filled with something that swirls like mercury laced with ink. This is all I have left, he says. It's not the elixir, but it's what feeds it. The breath catalyst. The stranger leans forward. That's real? Elio doesn't answer. He simply takes the vial, holds it to his ear, and listens. It doesn't hum, it whispers, like seawater caught in a conch shell, like a secret begging to be told. The whisper from the vial lingers in Elio's ears long after its return to the work table. It sounds like breath drawn in reverse, like someone gasping for truth instead of air. He sets it down gently, as though it might evaporate if offended. Brother Lucian watches him, arms crossed, the ghost of amusement tugging at his chapped lips. Still listening to your glass like it's a choir. It sings clearer than people, Elio replies. The stranger keeps their distance, eyes flicking between the flask and the vial. So this is the elixir? The thing that turns seawater into... Hey, truth, Lucian snorts. Into clarity, he corrects. Not quite the same thing. Elio nods. Truth is subjective. Clarity just strips away what hides it. And that, Lucian adds with a smirk, is far more dangerous. Back when the Alkahest Society operated under Venice's marble skin, the dream of clarity was everything. No more lies, no more masks, just a drink, and then the truth revealed, simple as rain. But it never was simple. They started with seawater, because it was everywhere. Common, alive, untamed. It held a kind of memory in its salinity, in its history. Elio had once read a fringe pamphlet, claiming that water could record events, emotions, even, and that if distilled in the right shape, it could replay them. Resonant memory, they'd called it. Let's walk through this slowly, Elio says, turning toward Lucian. We had 3 phases. Condensation, Lucian begins, then infusion, then containment, right. And we always failed at the second. Lucian shrugs. That's because we never had a stable catalyst. Cadro thought he found one with violet saltpeter, but it blew out the containment vessels. And you, Elio murmurs, you suggested an organic medium. Lucian raises a brow, still blaming me for that. You're the one who brought in the dove's lung extract. It worked, briefly. Elio waves a hand, until it caused hallucinations and irreversible transparency syndrome. At this, the stranger blinks. I'm sorry, transparency, what? Lucian chuckles. Not as glamorous as it sounds. Their skin started thinning, capillaries visible, bones like lanterns. They became almost see-through, died of exposure in the end. The stranger takes a step back from the table. It was only 2 subjects, Lucian mutters. Elio levels his sightless gaze toward the sound of Lucian's voice. No. 3. You just didn't report the 3rd one. For a moment, Lucian says nothing. Don't look so scandalized, he finally says. You knew what we were doing back then. It wasn't tea-making. Elio taps his cane once against the floor. The tone echoes. I came for the formula, he says, not the justifications. Lucian sighs and reaches into a cracked ledger. Its pages are buckled with humidity and time. But when he opens it, the scent of old vellum and charcoal spills into the room like a long-forgotten lullaby. He flips to a page marked with a red thread. Here, my final notes. It's still incomplete, but the ratios are close enough if the container is perfect, Elio finishes, and that was always the sticking point. The flask could not be just any vessel. It had to be blown at a precise temperature, cooled at a mathematically timed rate, and shaped in a curve that mirrored the human cochlea, because as some believed, truth was not read or seen. It was heard. Historians still debate, Elio says quietly, whether the flasks worked because of science or belief. Lucian grins. And you? I think the flasks worked because we believed hard enough that they would. He traces his fingers along the page, lips moving silently as he memorizes the ratios: salt concentration, heat of first boil, interval of lunar influence. There it is again, breath of fireless flame. No one knows what it truly meant. Some claimed it was a phrase lifted from an early Zoroastrian chant. Others said it referred to the last exhale of someone who had spoken nothing but the truth their whole life. A noble concept, but impractical. Unless, Elio stiffens, you still have it, don't you? Lucien blinks. What? The voice sample, from the dying man in Cadro's lab, the one who whispered his final words into a conical receiver. Lucien stares at him. That was lost in the fire. No, you copied everything. I know you did. Lucien hesitates, then mutters a curse. He walks to a locked drawer beneath the stuffed raven. With a key drawn from a chain around his neck, he opens it. Inside, a single wax cylinder. Elio smiles. You kept it. The stranger watches, confused. What is it? Elio places the wax cylinder in the phonograph. Lucien reluctantly pulls from beneath a sheet. The device hums to life. The voice that spills out is broken, raspy, barely a whisper. But even in its fragility, it sends a chill through the room. I lied once. I was 5. Took a fig from the stall. My mother made me swallow the whole thing, stem and all. That's when I knew truth burns less than lies. Silence follows. The stranger exhales, the sound nervous. Lucien turns away. We used that voice to shape the resonance curve of the containment flask. Didn't you wonder why yours always came out slightly bent at the neck? Elio nods slowly. They were remembering the fig. He rewraps the now ready flask in the silk. Its surface feels warmer than it should, like a pulse from glass. Lucien steps closer. Why now, Elio? Why bring this all back? The glassblower lifts his cane. Because someone is going to use it, and I'd rather the flask be right than the lie. Be safe. Lucien says nothing. His silence says too much. They leave shortly after. As they step out into Murano's wind-washed alleys, the stranger finally asks, what happens if it works? Elio doesn't answer for a long time. Then someone, somewhere, is going to wish they'd never asked for the truth. The wind picks up behind them, carrying the scent of fire, salt, and something else, something very old. Elio and the stranger leave Murano just before twilight, slipping back across the lagoon in a borrowed gondola. The water is still, strangely still, as if the lagoon itself is holding its breath. Elio listens closely. No wave slaps, no squawking gulls, just the soft clunk of the gondolier's pole tapping stone. Elio rests a hand on the satchel beside him, feeling the slight heat radiating from the repaired flask. The breath catalyst vial is nestled beside it, sealed tightly, pulsing ever so faintly with silvery ink. The stranger finally breaks the silence. He didn't kill Cadro, did he? Elio tilts his head, lips barely moving. No, so, who did? Elio's blind eyes remain on the horizon. That's what we're going to find out. The workshop is cold when they return. Not just in temperature, in presence. Something has shifted. Elio senses it as soon as he steps through the threshold. A draft curls unnaturally around his ankles. The hair on his arms rises. He runs his fingers across the floorboards. Still undisturbed, no footprints but their own, but the silence has changed. It's too held. He says nothing, just lights the furnace with a practiced strike of flint and gestures the stranger toward the door. Lock it, bolts and latch. As the heat spreads, Elio lays out his tools. You're going to start now? The stranger asks, incredulous. There's no more time, Elio mutters. Too many people remember just enough of Caligo to be dangerous. He sets the flask on a velvet-lined tray. A half-sphere of metal clamps hold it gently in place. Nearby, he arranges the infusion materials: crushed garnet, sea salt smoked over lavender, the breath catalyst, and a small crystal flask of seawater collected just off the coast of Torcello. The stranger eyes the seawater. You trust it's untainted? Elio smiles. That's the point. Truth lies hidden in what we call filth. Historically, seawater has been a paradox to alchemists. Some believed it to be impure, cluttered with decay and salt, unsuitable for transmutation. Others swore it was the perfect base, endlessly moving, full of memory and impossible to replicate. One fringe theory claims that every ounce of seawater contains particles from every ocean on Earth, making it the most globally informed substance known to man. Elio's own thoughts. It lies better than humans, but it doesn't forget. He begins with the garnet dust, tipping it into the flask using a bone-handled spoon. The powder glides down the neck of the glass like red smoke. Next comes the violet salt, then the seawater, added drop by drop with a glass pipette that ticks softly as each bead hits the dust. The mixture doesn't react. Not yet. Now Elio whispers. We add the voice. The breath catalyst, still faintly whispering in its vial, is uncorked. The room dims. Not the light, but the atmosphere, like sound itself, has been absorbed. The air thickens. Even the furnace seems to hold its flame more carefully. He pours. One drop. The flask shudders. Inside, the mixture begins to swirl, not mixing but orbiting, each substance maintaining shape, spinning in harmony. A deep hum resonates from the flask, a tone too low to hear but strong enough to feel in the chest cavity. It's not song, it's memory. The stranger steps back instinctively. What now? They ask. Now, Elio says. We wait. It's hours later when the door shakes. Not a knock, a rattle, like someone with cold fingers trying keys that don't fit. Elio and the stranger look toward the door in unison. Elio raises a hand and whispers, "Don't breathe." The latch jostles again, a breathy scrape. Then silence. Elio slowly moves toward the door, stepping silently, his cane pointed like a drawn rapier. He doesn't open it. Instead, he places his palm against the wood, waits, listens. Nothing, but the glass sings again. Behind him, the flask emits a single pure note, high, crystalline, the kind of sound you hear in a dream, where everything important is just out of reach. It's ready, he murmurs. The stranger doesn't move. Elio returns to the bench, heart steady, hands sure. We test it, he says. With what? The stranger asks. Not what. Who? The stranger freezes. I need you to speak into it, Elio says gently. They step back. You said it reveals truth. That's exactly why it must be tested with someone who's been lying. A long silence. Then, what if I don't want to know the truth? Elio cocks his head. No one does. But you're here anyway. He lifts the flask and holds it forward. Speak into the neck. Just say your name. The stranger hesitates, then leans in, eyes flickering toward the whirling storm of suspended elements inside the vessel. My name is... The flask flashes. Not brightly, not violently, just enough to flicker against the walls like moonlight on water. Inside, the red powder collapses. The seawater boils, then stills, and a name appears, written in vapor against the inner curve of the glass. Elio doesn't need to read it. He already knows. You're not who you said, he murmurs. The stranger looks away. It's complicated. Elio chuckles. Of course it is. Truth always is. There's another sound now, outside. This time, a knock. Not frantic, not forced, deliberate. 3 knocks. Elio whispers. Old code. The stranger looks at the flask. Is it safe? Elio holds it to his ear. It's stable. For now, he opens the door. And standing there, wet boots on stone, is a man Elio hasn't seen in half a century. He looks younger than he should, but the eyes, they belong to someone who's burned books in secret, someone who's seen what the elixir can do. Elio, the man says, we need to talk. Elio doesn't invite him in, yet, because this man, this visitor, was supposed to be dead. And if he's not, then the betrayal Elio remembers might not be the only one. The man at the door says nothing more, just stands there, rain dripping from his coat, face shrouded by a wide-brimmed hat, bent low like a scolded servant. Elio doesn't need his eyes to recognize the presence. And underneath that, lilac oil. Only one person ever wore lilac oil to mask the smell of burning copper. Sebastiano, Elio says, voice flat. The stranger tenses behind him. Who? Elio keeps his gaze unfocused. My first betrayal. Sebastiano steps over the threshold without invitation, shaking water from his hat, and glancing around the room like it might vanish if he blinks too fast. I heard the glass sang again, he says. Elio doesn't answer. Sebastiano smiles grimly. Still the quiet type, the silence stretches. Then, with the kind of care reserved for relics and corpses, Sebastiano draws a small jagged fragment from his cloak, pale green, slightly curved, glass, but not from any ordinary flask. Elio doesn't have to touch it to know. It's from the original Caligo vessel, the one thought destroyed. You kept a piece, Elio murmurs. I found it, Sebastiano corrects. In the ashes of the Squirla, 5 years ago. Elio frowns. You were supposed to be in those ashes. Sebastiano shrugs. A little misdirection, a little panic. Everyone thinks what they want to believe when fire gets involved. Historians still argue whether the fire that consumed the Squirla di Vapori was accidental or deliberate. Some records speak of an overheated alembic. Others hint at sabotage, a lesser-known theory, mostly buried in footnotes, claims a coordinated arson was used to fake deaths of key members, letting them scatter and resurface under new names. Looks like at least one of those footnotes was true. The stranger clears their throat. If you faked your death, why come back now? Sebastiano turns to them. His gaze is piercing, calculating. Because people are trying to rebuild something they don't understand. He pulls a letter from his coat, wax-sealed, edges burnt. Elio hears it crinkle as it's set on the table. Someone is gathering fragments, recipes, names. They don't care what it does, only that it does. Elio picks up the letter with 2 fingers and sniffs the seal. Pine sap, camphor, and lemon oil. That's an old code, Sebastiano nods. It means urgent and dangerous, like the time we had to evacuate the Lazaretto Vecchio when that distillation went bad. Elio exhales sharply through his nose. We lost 3 flasks and a goat. Sebastiano cracks a rare grin. The goat was the most innocent among us. The stranger blinks. Wait, what happened to the goat? Elio waves it off. He drank the second batch, had visions of St. Agnes and tried to baptize himself in boiling sugar water. Sebastiano chuckles. Tragic. But oddly enlightening. The light moment fades as Elio unseals the letter and fingers the folds of parchment. The message is short. Handwritten in alchemical shorthand. Recreation imminent. Unknown hands. Trace north. Flask of second tone. He folds it back and lays it flat. The flask they're using, he murmurs, wasn't made by me. Sebastiano nods. Correct. That's why I'm here. They've built something close, but it's wrong. Slight deviation in the neck curvature. If someone uses it, it might not just show truth. What then? The stranger asks. Sebastiano's tone drops to a whisper. It might create it. That's the danger. The original elixir never forced truths. It revealed what was already there, buried. But if a false vessel distorts the resonance, if the breath catalyst binds improperly, it could imprint false clarity. Truths that never existed. A powerful weapon in the right or wrong hands. You still have the records? Elio asks Sebastiano. He nods, encrypted. Some are in an abbey outside Vicenza. That's where we start then. But before they can move, the repaired flask on the table cracks. A single, hairline fracture slithers across its surface. Elio freezes. No. It wasn't touched. The stranger leans forward. What happened? Elio puts his ear to the glass. It's reacting to proximity, he whispers. Something here is too close to the original incident. Sebastiano shifts his weight. Could it be me? Possibly. Or the shard. Or, Elio straightens. What happened to the rest of the original vessel? Sebastiano's silence answers the question. Elio's fingers curl into a fist. You tried to rebuild it. I tried to preserve it. With guesswork and ego, Elio growls. Sebastiano lowers his gaze. I didn't want it to die with us. There's a heavy pause. Then the stranger says, So what do we do now? Elio reaches for a second flask, a blank, raw glass vessel, untested, unformed. He holds it like a sculptor might cradle uncut marble. We finish what we started, he says, properly, safely, with hands that remember not just the truth, but the cost of it. He turns to Sebastiano. We go to the Abbey tomorrow, but if you have anything else, notes, voice samples, old water stores, I need them tonight. Sebastiano nods. You'll have them. And then, with a glance at the cracked flask, he adds, let's hope it still remembers us kindly. Elio doesn't reply, because glass remembers everything, especially betrayal. Elio doesn't sleep that night. He sits by the furnace, listening to it breathe. The crackling of coals is a language he understands better than Latin, better than Hebrew, better than the half-buried scripts scrawled in the margins of old Alcahest ledgers. The cracked flask rests near his elbow, wrapped loosely in lamb's wool, like an injured bird too fragile to heal, but too meaningful to bury. The stranger paces near the back of the room, not speaking. Sebastiano is gone, off to retrieve the promised materials from wherever he's stashed them. His absence is a relief. Elio hates sharing silence with ghosts. Can I ask something? The stranger finally says. Elio doesn't respond right away. He lifts a piece of clear glass, still warm from the furnace, and turns it slowly in his fingers, letting it bend the firelight in long, sleepy arcs. Go ahead, he says softly. Why did you stay here, in Venice? If they were hunting the society, why not leave? Elio smiles faintly, because you only vanish once. After that, you're just running. The stranger nods, leaning against the workbench. You really believe that flask shows truth? Elio sets the glass down gently. It doesn't show, it purifies. Whatever's poured into it, poison, wine, seawater, it separates what's real from what's added. The elixir, it reacts with memory, not logic. That's the problem. People think truth is a thing. It's not. It's a filter, and no two people see through it the same way. The furnace lets out a small, protesting pop. Elio rises, slowly, and turns a valve to release the pressure. I learned that the night I lost my sight, he adds. The stranger's head lifts. You've never told me what happened. Elio exhales. The breath smells of ash and rosemary oil. I was forging the first complete resonance flask in the chamber beneath the scuola. Cadro had just died. Lucian had disappeared. Sebastiano was playing diplomat with the Florentine spy masters. It was just me and the prototype. He sits again, fingers tracing the pattern of the cane across his lap. The mistake wasn't the mixture. It was the silence. I didn't notice the glass vibrating out of rhythm. It cracked during a kneeling, sent a splinter through the bellows, ignited the sulfur vat. Flash of white. Pain like someone carving my eyes with acid. The stranger is silent. Elio continues. I was blind before I understood what I saw. Outside, the wind shifts. Sea brine and chimney smoke drift in through the window grates. From somewhere down the canal, someone sings, a soft, slurred lullaby in Venetian dialect. I thought it was over, Elio says. I was ready to live the rest of my life, making harmless trinkets, stoppers, perfume bottles, but the glass wouldn't let me, wouldn't let you. The stranger echoes. Elio smiles wryly. It kept whispering. It began a few weeks after the accident. Elio was recovering in a fisherman's attic on Giudecca, listening to waves slosh against stone. Every night, he'd lie awake, hearing nothing, and then something. Soft tones, faint chimes, patterns of sound that no one else acknowledged. He thought it was phantom echo at first, until one night, in the dark, he held a discarded wine bottle and realized the notes were coming from inside the glass. The bottle vibrated in his hands. It was talking. He returned to the forge within a month. People say losing one sense heightens the others. That's not quite true. It doesn't heighten. It sharpens, like a blade, and Elio's hearing became so precise, he could tell the difference between leaded and pure silica glass just by the breath it gave under heat. He could feel imperfections in molten form, map faults through the pitch of its cooling size. There's actually an obscure theory, whispered among fringe restorers, that certain glassmakers achieve something called aural resonance imprinting. The idea that by listening closely enough to a substance, you can read its emotional past, ridiculed by mainstream chemists, of course. But those same chemists can't explain why some of Elio's flasks respond to lies without ever being touched. The stranger leans closer. So, the blindness made you better. No, Elio says gently. The silence did. Sebastiano returns just before dawn. He carries a small wooden case bound in iron wire and sealed with wax stamped in obsidian. Elio smells crushed wormwood as soon as it enters the room, a protective blend against spiritual interference, according to the old texts. He places the box on the table, runs a fingertip along the seal. Still warm, he murmurs. Inside scroll fragments, an uncut crystal prism, and a thick vial of deep green oil that seems to cling to the glass even when tilted. I took this from Cadro's personal shelf, Sebastiano says. Before the fire, Elio lifts the vial and listens. No whispers, but the sound is dense, like a hum trapped under velvet. This, he says, will stabilize the second vessel. The stranger stares. There's going to be a second. There must be, Elio replies. The first one cracked. That's a sign. Something's still unresolved. Sebastiano winces. Maybe the past is just resisting closure. Elio doesn't argue. He simply moves to the furnace and begins again. The new flask forms slower. The sand blend is purer. The temperature higher. The annealing chamber calibrated down to the heartbeat. This flask will hold not just an elixir but intent, will. Sebastiano helps in silence. The stranger fetches materials, scribes notes, files edges. No one speaks except in necessary murmurs. As the vessel takes shape, Elio hears the resonance begin. Not a tone, not yet, but a harmony forming. He shapes the neck with steady breath. The curve is perfect, not for sound, but for memory. That night, the three sit around a low table, the new flask resting between them. The furnace glows like a sleeping beast behind them. Elio turns to Sebastiano. Tell me about that night, the scuola, all of it. Sebastiano looks down and begins to speak. Sebastiano doesn't start with the fire. He starts with the day before. It was quiet, he says, gaze fixed on the glowing embers. Too quiet. The kind of silence that means someone's watching, but you haven't figured out from where. Cilio nods, listening to the cadence more than the words. Truth tends to leave a rhythm behind. Lies stutter. Truth bleeds. We'd just received the resonance calculations from Lucien. He was already disappearing by then, skipping meetings, sending coded notes in wine shipments. You remember? I remember, Elio says. You defended him. Sebastiano smiles faintly. Turns out, he was just tired of being second. Outside, wind slides along the canal, threading through shutters and chimneys. Inside, the new flask gleams on the table, cooling in its cradle of straw and ash. Lucien wasn't the only one acting strange. Sebastiano continues. Cadro had grown paranoid. He stopped drinking from communal cups, spoke in riddles. Once I caught him writing a letter with invisible ink, lemon juice, heated over a brass plate. I asked him who it was for. He said, someone who remembers how to forget. Elio leans forward slightly. You think he knew? Sebastiano shrugs. I think he knew someone was going to betray us. He just didn't know who. Or maybe he did. He pulls something from his satchel, a worn page, its edges flaked with age. A letter. Elio's fingertips glide over the fibers. He recognizes the handwriting. It's Cadro's. The glass will not forgive. You may lie, but it listens. I have sealed my final notes beneath the false floor. Let them break me if they must. Better I crack than the vessel. Elio exhales. The floor in the western alcove. Sebastiano nods. Gone. Burned with the rest. But that letter was in my coat. I was meant to deliver it. I never did, because the fire started before you could. Sebastiano looks away, because I panicked. I ran. The stranger speaks up. You didn't start the fire? Sebastiano shakes his head. No. But I think I was meant to be blamed for it. Historians still argue whether the fire was internal sabotage, an Inquisition raid, or a test gone wrong. What few know is that the official report listed Sebastiano as both a casualty and a suspect. His name was struck from the Murano registry and sealed behind red wax, an act typically reserved for traitors or warlocks. I left through the catacombs beneath the workshop, he says quietly, swam to the canal. I still dream of it. Cold water, red light above me, the flask singing like a cracked bell. Elio says nothing. He remembers that night too. The air in the chamber had gone heavy, not hot, dense. The resonance vessel had been activated too early. Someone had poured the catalyst into unstable mixture. The flask's shape hadn't been complete. And when Elio screamed, it wasn't from pain, it was from knowing. The truth was broken. I think it was Lucien, Sebastiano murmurs. Elio shakes his head. No, he wasn't there. Exactly. Too conveniently absent. A pause. Then what if it wasn't just about the elixir? The stranger frowns. What do you mean? Elio turns toward the flask. What if it wasn't just meant to reveal truth, but control it? Forge new memories. Rewrite guilt. Choose what survives. Sebastiano's jaw tightens. That's not what we agreed on. Elio chuckles darkly. We agreed on nothing. We experimented. We hoped. The stranger approaches the flask. So what does this new one do? The one we just made? Elio stands slowly. We find out. Together. He places a drop of seawater into the vessel, then a flake of Cadro's old parchment. And finally, just a breath, whispered against the rim. Sebastiano follows, saying a name, Lucien. The stranger, after a moment, says, Caligo. The mixture spins, settles, and then glows, not with light, but with shape. A cloud forms in the belly of the flask, swirling like mist trapped in amber, and within that fog, letters, then faces. Elio gasps. It shows Cadro standing in the chamber, arms raised, not in prayer but in protection. Behind him, another figure, hooded, pouring the catalyst, hand trembling, a sharp flick of movement, then fire. Sebastiano stares. It wasn't Lucien. Elio's breath trembles. No, it was someone else. Someone we never saw. The stranger leans forward, voice tight. Look closer. The figure in the flask turns. Just for a second, their face is clear. Elio's stomach drops. I know that face. It's not a member of the society. It's a clergyman, one of the Inquisition. A plant, a saboteur. Sebastiano curses. They wanted us to destroy ourselves. Elio nods slowly, and we obliged. The image fades. The flask cools. And for the first time in decades, Elio feels clarity, not the kind brewed in alchemical circles or poured into flasks, but the quiet certainty that everything they did, everything was compromised from the start. We were never just rebels, he says softly. We were bait. A long silence follows. Then the stranger asks, so what now? Elio looks toward the cracked first vessel, the glowing new one, and the vial of breath catalyst still half full. Now, he says, we stop pretending this was ever just about alchemy. He turns to the others. This was a war. The next morning breaks reluctantly, with a sun so pale it looks embarrassed to be seen. Venice groans to life in slow motion, gulls whining, canal water slapping wooden posts, and the low murmur of merchants muttering through crates of salted fish. But inside Elio's shop, everything is still. Too still. Elio stands by the furnace, not stoking it, just listening. Sebastiano sleeps, sprawled gracelessly on a wool blanket near the back wall. The stranger sips cooled tea, but their eyes remain on the new flask, which now rests under a bell jar, dimly luminous in the dawn light. No cracks, no fog, just a smooth, sleeping kind of truth. You called it a war, the stranger says, not quite asking. Elio nods. Not one fought with blades or banners, one of ideas, of knowing, of remembering. He moves to the sideboard, opens a hidden drawer, and withdraws a leather-bound book, warped at the corners. The cover bears the symbol of the Alcahest Society, a circle within a triangle within a square, simple, geometric, meaningless to most. But Elio's fingers trace it like an old scar. After Cadro died, he says, we all assumed it was from within. Politics, pride, maybe even madness. He flips the book open, revealing tight calligraphy interspersed with diagrams, flask shapes, ingredient proportions, resonance cycles. But now, he continues, we know someone infiltrated us, planted false instructions, pushed the elixir beyond safety. The stranger leans closer, to destroy the society, to discredit us, Elio says, to ensure that no one ever trusted glassmakers again, that truth would remain theirs. In the 17th century, Venice had more secrets than stone buildings. The Inquisition maintained an office tucked into the shadow of the Basilica de San Marco, not for spectacle but for subtlety. Unlike the Spanish Inquisition's overt brutality, the Venetian branch preferred erasure over violence. They didn't need to burn you. They just needed to remove you. One morning you were a name on a ledger. By sundown you were vapor. It is said that during the height of Moreno's innovation, the Inquisition embedded agents among the furnaces, not to stop the glassmakers but to guide them away from discovery, away from power. Elio turns a page. Here, look. He points, though blindly, at a sketch, a triple-chambered flask with a spiral inner neck. This was not ours, he says. We found it on a sealed blueprint after the fire, but it predates our designs by nearly a decade. The signature on the page was forged, badly. Whoever drew it had never heard a flask sing. The angles were too sharp. The stranger frowns. Then who made it? Sebastiano, groggy but awake now, answers from the floor. The same people who wanted to create false truth, not to discover, but to control. He sits up, rubbing sleep from his jaw. There were rumors, back in the day, of a hidden guild, not alchemists. Correctors, trained to intercept discoveries that got too close to destabilizing the Republic. Historians still argue whether the correctors existed, Elio says quietly. No one ever proved it. Sebastiano scoffs. Isn't that the point? The stranger's voice is soft. Then why not just kill you? Elio closes the book, because it's harder to destroy an idea than to distort it. Better to let us destroy ourselves. Better to let the flask explode. Let the city believe we went mad chasing fantasies. People fear lies less than they fear uncomfortable truths. There's a pause. Then, so what do we do with the elixir now? Elio walks toward the bell jar and lifts it. The flask hums, a long, low tone, like a cello string plucked underwater. It's not finished, he says, because it's not meant to be. Sebastiano stands now, brushing soot from his coat. You're going to test it again? Elio nods. But not here. He opens the floor hatch under the rug. Beneath, a narrow stairwell descending into the canal wall, a forgotten storage tunnel from when Venice fortified itself against Napoleonic ambitions. Damp and cramped, but quiet. Soundproof, perfect for truth. I built a chamber down there years ago, Elio says, in case I ever had to speak with the flask. The stranger raises a brow. Speak with it? Not to it, Elio says. With, truth's a conversation, not a monologue. They descend. The chamber is dark, stone-walled and lined with mirrors, some cracked, some silvered into fog. In the center sits a pedestal of black marble. Elio sets the flask atop it. Sebastiano lights a lantern. Why mirrors? To remind the flask that even light lies. Elio replies. He steps back. The stranger hesitates, then follows. Elio removes the crystal vial of seawater, what remains of the original batch used in the schooner. He uncorks it, pours it into the flask, then slowly, deliberately, he draws a single hair from his own head and drops it in. The reaction is instant. The liquid inside shifts color, blue, then green, then gold. Symbols form like ink bleeding on old linen. Then a voice, not spoken but felt in the chest. Do you want to remember? Elio flinches. The flask has never spoken first before. Sebastiano looks at him, pale. Elio nods slowly. Yes. The tone changes. A shape forms in the glass. A face. Familiar. Elio's mother. Then his first mentor. Then Cadro. Then himself. The stranger gasps. What is it showing you? Elio doesn't answer, because the next face is the clergyman. And this time he speaks. You remember me, the voice says, because I made you forget. Elio stumbles backward, grabbing the wall. The tone of the flask spikes, an aching sound like truth being pried from deep roots. Sebastiano lunges forward, sealing the top with a cloth stopper. The tone dies. Silence. Elio breathes hard. It's not just memory, it's a door. The stranger steadies him. A door. To what? Elio looks up, blind eyes wide. To whoever's been shaping our truths from the start. The flask sleeps again under its bell jar, but no one in the room can relax. Elio sits slumped on a stool in the workshop's corner, a cool cloth draped across his forehead. His fingers tremble, not from fear, he's past fear, but from something deeper, exposure, as if some protective layer within him has been peeled back and left raw. The stranger says nothing. They keep glancing at the flask, as though expecting it to spring to life again and start speaking riddles or accusations. Sebastiano is pacing. He hasn't stopped since they came back up from the hidden chamber. You saw the clergyman. He mutters for the third time. You heard him say he erased something. Elio lifts the cloth from his eyes. Yes, and now you believe it wasn't just sabotage. It was what? A targeted purge of memory. Elio leans forward, resting elbows on knees. Not purge, rewrite. The stranger frowns. But why? What memory could be dangerous enough to erase from you? Elio lets the question hang in the air. Then slowly he reaches behind the workbench and lifts a small leather pouch, stitched with thread too fine to be local. From within it, he withdraws a shard of glass, no bigger than a coin, opalescent, and etched faintly with concentric circles. I found this the day after the fire, he says, not in the ashes. In my coat pocket. I had no memory of putting it there. No explanation, just this fragment and an echo in my mind that said, remember nothing. He places it on the bench with a soft clink, no resonance, no glow, just stillness, like silence, that's been sealed. Historians still debate whether Venetian alchemists truly dabbled in memory manipulation. Some dismiss the idea as metaphor, transforming one's understanding of events, not the memories themselves. But there are accounts, diaries, scribbled margins, even graffiti etched into Murano alley walls that suggest memory could be infused, siphoned, even stored in specially treated glass. Whole fringe theory once proposed that Venice's obsession with mirrors wasn't just vanity, it was insurance, that mirrored surfaces were placed in homes not to reflect appearance, but to preserve identities in case they were taken. Elio sighs. I think that flask, the original Caligo vessel, wasn't just meant to reveal truth, it could also extract it, hide it. Sebastiano stops pacing. You think they used it on you? I think they used it on all of us. Later that day, a knock comes, not a signal, not a code, just a soft, irregular tapping. 3 short, 1 long. Elio's face tightens. He stands and walks to the door, cane in one hand, the glass shard in the other. He opens it. Standing on the step is a girl, no more than 12, cloak far too large, ink-stained fingers, sharp eyes. You are Elio? She asks in crisp, practiced Italian. I am. She hands him a sealed envelope. He said you'd know what to do. Elio's brow furrows. Who? She shrugs, the man with the broken voice. And then she turns and disappears down the alley before anyone can stop her. Elio closes the door. Sebastiano mutters, broken voice. The stranger looks pale. The clergyman. Elio says nothing. He opens the envelope. Inside is a note, written in the same spidery handwriting as the original society ledgers. Glass holds what we forget, but some truths were buried in mirrors, not flasks. Find the collector. There's no signature. Elio flips the note, an address, and a name, Santa Maria dei Miracoli. A church. Small, obscure, quiet, famous, yes, but not for its sermons, for its mirrors. The trio moves quickly. Santa Maria dei Miracoli sits near the edge of Cannaregio, nestled like a quiet pearl between twisting alleyways. Built of shimmering marble and known for its perfect symmetry, it was once called the jewel box of Venice, but most people never noticed the hidden alcoves, the misplaced reflections, the doors that didn't appear unless the sun struck at a particular angle. Elio moves through its corridors with surprising certainty, even in blindness. He touches the floor tiles, counting them, turns left at a breeze he shouldn't feel, stops beside a statue of Saint Cecilia, and knocks once on the base. It opens, a narrow spiral stair. The stranger swears softly. Was everything in this city built on secret doors? Yes, Sebastiano mutters, especially the things meant to be forgotten. At the bottom is a chamber, round, mirrored, dozens of panels, some intact, others cracked, a few fogged from within, each one reflecting a different version of the three of them as they enter. The Elio in the second panel still has eyes. The stranger in the fourth looks older. The Sebastiano in the sixth is weeping. Elio, the stranger, breathes. What is this place? He steps forward, puts a hand on one of the mirrors. His reflection doesn't match. It's a memory vault, Elio says, used by the early chemists who feared written records would be destroyed. They found a way to bind memory into mirrored surfaces, not just visions, but moments, intact, preserved, Sebastiano whispers. Historians called them myths. Elio lays a hand on a panel. They were wrong. A voice answers, not from behind, from within the mirror. Elio. It's Cadro, not alive, not dead, preserved. He stares from within the glass, lips moving, tone level, no sound, yet words resonate in the chest. The one who made me drink the unstable catalyst wore a crucifix with a black ribbon. Not Lucian, not a brother. Elio steps back. The panel fogs, then clears. No more Cadro. The stranger whispers. The clergyman again. Elio nods. But something else bothers him. That crucifix. The black ribbon. He's seen it before. But where? Then he remembers. On the man who brought the broken flask to his door. The first stranger. The one who started all of this. And he hadn't noticed it until now. Elio's mouth is dry. He stands still, hand trembling ever so slightly against the edge of the mirror's frame. The chamber is silent now, though the memory's echo still lingers in the air like the hum of a struck tuning fork. The voice, Cadro's voice, had been calm, too calm, as if even in death, the man knew he'd been left behind. The crucifix, Elio says softly. I've seen it. Sebastiano squints. Where? Elio turns slowly toward the stranger standing just beside him. Not the one in the memory, the one in the room. You brought someone to my door, Elio says. That first night, with the broken flask. The stranger's eyes narrow. Yes. The courier. You said you didn't know who he was. I didn't. Elio's tone sharpens. You didn't notice the crucifix he wore. The stranger's face tightens. They say nothing. Sebastiano exhales. You knew. No, the stranger says. I saw it. I recognized it. But I didn't understand until now. Elio crosses the chamber, voice low and heavy. That ribbon, it's Inquisition mourning cloth. Not for someone dead. For someone disavowed, an exalted penitent, Sebastiano breathes. The term isn't well known today. It doesn't appear in church archives or state records. But among certain alchemists, those who survived purges and lived to whisper, the exalted penitents were the Vatican's secret shame, men who had once been inquisitors themselves, but who had seen too much, those who knew the cost of suppressing knowledge and kept going anyway. They were given one last role: to erase, to alter, and if needed, to redirect memory itself. Fringe scholars claim these men weren't just inquisitors but counter-alchemists, sent to unmake what was made. Sebastiano's voice is tight. If one of them got hold of the Caligo process, they could manufacture truth. Elio finishes. The mirror panels suddenly shimmer. Elio reaches out, palm grazing a surface that feels warm, too warm for stone. The reflection changes. A scene unfolds, a cathedral chamber lit by candelabras, high-arched ceilings, a marble floor gleaming with wax. In the center, a small table, on it the original Caligo flask. Around it, 6 figures in shadowed robes. The scene freezes on one figure stepping forward. The man's face is half obscured, but the black ribbon on the crucifix is clear. A golden circle is etched on his collar, a symbol Elio knows. He leans in. Stop the image, he commands. The mirror obeys. Elio presses a finger to the symbol. That's the seal of the Archivium Obscura. Sebastiano pales. That's not a myth? No. The stranger frowns. What is it? Elio turns. A vault, beneath Rome. Not in the Vatican library, under it. It was created to hold forbidden knowledge. Books, experiments, people, Sebastiano swallows hard. I heard it was sealed centuries ago. Then someone broke the seal. The stranger steps back. Are you saying that flask, the original, was brought there? I'm saying it was rebuilt there, Elio replies. And if it was, there might be others. Outside, Venice continues as if nothing has changed. The church bells chime, gondolas drift. Tourists admire marble facades, unaware that beneath their feet, old wars still burn. Back in the shop, Elio lowers himself onto his stool and folds his hands over his cane. The glass shard, the one from his coat, sits on the table beside the new flask. It still hasn't spoken. Why leave it in your coat? The stranger asks. Elio shrugs. So I'd find it. So I'd ask questions. Sebastiano eyes the new flask. What happens if someone drinks from it? Elio lifts his head. We don't drink from it. You used to. And now I know better. The stranger leans against the workbench. So what happens next? We go to Rome? Sneak into a hidden archive? What? Crash through the floor of the Sistine Chapel? Sebastiano snorts. The Archivium isn't beneath the chapel. It's beneath the catacombs under San Callisto. Very unofficial. No guards. Just warnings. Elio strokes the curve of the flask. We're not ready yet. Not without protection. From who? The stranger asks. From the truth. That evening, a knock comes at the door. Not soft, not secret. Brazen. Elio listens. The knock is rhythmic. Familiar. 3. Pause. 2. He nods to Sebastiano. It's her. Sebastiano opens the door. A woman steps in, tall, wearing robes the color of deep plum and a shawl lined with gold thread. Her hair is braided tight against her scalp. Her eyes are black as oil and twice as reflective. Elio, she says, smiling, still blind, still meddling. And you, Elio says, still rude. The stranger watches with confusion. Sebastiano bows, just slightly. Ah, Renata. The woman nods. You look less guilty than last time. Ah, Renata, one of the few former society members who had not vanished or been destroyed. She left before the fire, took with her the memory transfer rituals used in pre-Christian Egypt. She was their memory keeper, their fail-safe. She unclasps her cloak and steps forward. You summoned me. I need shielding, Elio says. She raises a brow. For the mind? For the soul? She eyes the new flask. You rebuilt it. Elio nods. And it sang? Elio hesitates. It whispered. Her eyes narrow. Then we don't have much time. She reaches into her satchel, withdraws a small phial of thick, clear oil. Anoint your temples before contact, she says. It doesn't block the truth, but it will keep it from fracturing you. Elio takes it wordlessly. The stranger steps closer. Why would it fracture him? Renata looks at them evenly, because the next time the flask speaks, it won't just show memory, it will ask for yours. Silence. Then Elio says, we leave for Rome in 2 days, and for the first time in years, he feels something he thought had died with the old guild, not fear. Resolve. The fog rolls in the morning they depart, thick and low, hugging the lagoon like a secret. It clings to rooftops and gondola moorings, swallowing footsteps and muting the world. Elio takes it as a sign. Venice doesn't want them to go, or perhaps it's shielding them, like a mother watching her children step into danger and pretending not to see. They leave by water, quietly, with no farewells. Renata leads the way, face wrapped in silk, her satchel close at her side. She's already booked passage through old channels, travelling under the name Madre Sarita, an assumed title she uses only when things might get illegal or theological. Sebastiano carries the crate of materials, tightly bound and double-sealed with alchemical wax. The new flask sits inside it, wrapped in ashcloth and prayer thread. It's quiet now, no hum, no glow, but Elio knows it isn't dormant, just listening. The stranger, still unnamed, walks beside Elio, quiet as ever, though something's shifted. Since the encounter in the mirror vault, their questions have slowed, less urgent, more personal. You're sure it's Rome? They ask as the barge slips past Giudecca's edge. No, Elio says, but Rome is where they would go, if they wanted to rewrite the past and make it look like piety. They reach the mainland by nightfall, boarding a carriage driven by a man who doesn't speak and has no interest in their luggage. Ilio listens to the horses. Their hooves clatter like ticking clocks against the Roman road. The journey takes 2 days. They sleep in shifts. They eat little. The road winds through forests thick with cicadas, and occasional travellers who pretend not to notice the strange company in the carriage. Ilio dreams of glass, not the kind he shapes, but the kind that reflects too much. He sees a mirror filled not with his own face, but with all the truths he's hidden from himself. He wakes sweating, his fingers clamped around his cane like a blade. Renata notices. She says nothing. On the 3rd morning, they reach Rome. It's not the Rome you see in paintings. This is the Rome between monuments, the one behind crumbling churches and half-boarded villas, a city that has grown tired of its own grandeur, a city that whispers to those who listen. Renata leads them through narrow alleyways toward Aventine Hill, where the air smells of orange blossom and old paper. Beneath a half-burned chapel, San Silvestro Minor, they find what they came for, a rusted gate, locked, sealed with lead. Elio places a hand on it. It hasn't been opened in years, Renata murmurs. Good, Elio says. Then it might still be clean. Sebastiano steps forward, producing a key from beneath his cloak. It took me 10 years to find this. Renata raises an eyebrow. You kept a key to a myth? He shrugs. I believed it wasn't. The gate creaks open. The Archivium Obscura isn't a single vault. It's a labyrinth. Stone corridors twist into arches and doorless thresholds, lined with shelves that haven't been dusted in centuries. Scrolls, vials, obsidian slabs etched with formulas. No one's translated. Books bound in languages that shimmer like oil in the light. And mirrors. Always mirrors. They walk in silence past alcoves where statues wear blindfolds and lanterns flicker without flame. It was a storage site, Renata says softly. Not for heresy, for dangerous knowledge. Not what's false, but what's too true. Ilio senses it. The air here is dense. Thoughts feel heavier, like each memory you carry might echo if you breathe too hard. They reach the central chamber, a circular room, 7 podiums, 1 empty. And at the center, a cradle made of black iron and alabaster, shaped to hold a flask. Sebastiano approaches it slowly. They were trying to rebuild it, he murmurs, but they didn't finish. Renata gestures to the walls. They couldn't, because the last voice sample was missing, the one you recovered. Elio unfastens the satchel, lifts the flask with care. It hums immediately, soft, warm, not angry. Eager, he places it in the cradle. The room shifts, not physically, temporally. The stranger gasps. Did it just? Yes, Elio whispers. It's aligning with something that happened here. The flask glows, and the air distorts. A vision forms, not in the glass, not in the mirrors, but in the room itself, like memory projected into air. The clergyman appears again, older, frailer, speaking into a predecessor flask. Behind him, 2 monks and a woman with a cane made of bone. They are arguing. We cannot preserve this, the woman says. It alters what it touches. We already did, the clergyman says, voice hoarse. The society is gone. The memories erased. It worked. The vision flickers. Elio stumbles. Sebastiano catches him. Renata leans close. This is residual memory, echoes trapped in the construction of the flask. That's what the true vessel does. It doesn't store truth. It stores history. The clergyman turns toward them, toward the present. His eyes lock on Elio. He says, I'm sorry, then vanishes. The flask goes dark, and then a pulse, low, trembling. The cradle cracks. Sebastiano yells, pulling Elio away as a gout of heat bursts upward from the base. The flask is untouched, but the pedestal melts like wax. Then everything goes still. No collapse, no fire, just quiet. Renata speaks first. They tried to hide memory here, not destroy it. But the vessel we brought, it completed the loop. Elio sits on the floor, chest heaving. The stranger kneels beside him. What now? Elio looks at the flask, still whole, still silent. They didn't destroy truth, he says. They buried it, layered lies over it like paint. He touches the warm glass, and now we've peeled it back. Sebastiano crouches, eyes wide. You realize what this means? The flask can reveal suppressed memories. Not just yours, anyone's. Renata nods, which means we need to decide who gets to see what comes next. Because now that the flask is whole and awake, the past is no longer forgotten. It's waiting. They spend the night in the depths of the Archivium Obscura, not by choice. The stairwell collapses an hour after the pedestal cracked. Whether it was the strain of awakening the memory flask or the chamber itself reacting to their presence, no one knows. Dust chokes the corridor. Stones block the way back. Above them, Rome continues to breathe in marble silence, unaware of the truths shifting far beneath its feet. They light 2 lanterns and settle among the ruins of knowledge. It's cold. It smells of parchment, metal, and things better left unnamed. Elio sits closest to the flask, his hands folded over his cane. He doesn't touch the vessel now. The pulse within it has slowed, but it's not dormant. If anything, it's listening harder, waiting, deciding. Sebastiano pages through a leather tome covered in wax sigils, eyes scanning diagrams of experimental flasks never completed, triple-bellied models, spiral cores, one design involving magnetized sand. The stranger hunches over a broken mirror frame, watching the reflections shift unnaturally between what is and what was. Renata stands near a wall of etched brass panels. This chamber, she says softly, wasn't just storage, it was an interface. Elio nods. A memory relay. She glances back. To what? Elio hesitates. Then says, the Codex. Sebastiano looks up. That's a rumor. Everything we've seen is a rumor, Elio mutters. Until it isn't. The Codex was always a whispered legend among alchemists. A book that didn't just contain memory but remembered on its own. An artifact created not with ink and vellum, but through infusion. Writing traced with blood, saliva, fragments of soul, each page sealed in treated glass and fed residual memory over years. A dangerous tool, a perfect archive. Historians still argue whether it ever existed. Some believe it was a metaphor for collective guilt. Others think it was disassembled and hidden across Europe after the fall of Byzantium. But a fringe scholar once proposed something wilder, that the Codex didn't need to be carried. It simply needed to be accessed, and that only a true vessel, a calibrated flask, could unlock it. Now, Elio wasn't sure that scholar had been wrong. The stranger speaks up. What's in it? Everything the church erased, Elio says. The early alchemical rites, forbidden formulas, names, maps, and memory, Renata finishes. Truths no one asked to remember. A deep hum stirs in the walls. For a moment, everyone freezes. The flask remains quiet. But something behind the brass panels clicks. Elio turns his head. That wasn't the flask. Sebastiano steps forward, lantern raised. A panel slides aside. Behind it, a narrow tunnel, dry and clean, dustless, preserved. Renata frowns. Someone's been maintaining it. Elio stands, then someone else still knows. They move down the tunnel, single file. The walls hum faintly with resonance. It's not sound, it's like pressure behind the ears. The feeling you get just before a storm. After 20 paces, they reach a door. Not stone, not wood, glass. Smoky, opaque. The surface is engraved with symbols that shimmer faintly in lantern light. Elio places his hand against it. It opens. No hinges, no sound, just slides inward like breath escaping a sealed mouth. Inside, the room is round. Of course it is. At its center, a pedestal of obsidian, upon which rests the Codex. They know it without speaking. The book is rectangular, bound in copper-threaded leather, its spine embossed with an Ouroboros swallowing a key. Around the room, floating glass orbs, dozens, some cracked, some dark, others glowing faintly with shifting color. Memories, Renata says, trapped like insects in amber. Sebastiano reaches for one. Elio grabs his wrist. No, they're not inert. He gestures toward one of the glowing orbs. Inside it, a man kneeling in prayer, or pain. His mouth moves, but no sound. Then Elio whispers, "That's me." The man in the orb is him. Younger, sighted, covered in ash and glass shards, reaching out toward a broken flask. His final moment before the fire, the stranger swallows. Then these are all yours. No, Elio says. Some are mine, others. There's from people who never escaped. He turns to the codex. He touches the cover. The book shudders beneath his fingers, then opens. Not like a normal book, but like a lung. It breathes. Pages fan outward, though no wind touches them. Symbols shimmer and settle. Words write themselves along the surface, as though responding to presence. Elio scans the first page, then stops. This isn't Latin. Araneta steps forward. It's Avestan, from the fire temples. Elio nods, the language of the flame. He turns another page. This one is in Egyptian Demotic, the next Hebrew, then Sanskrit. The book shifts languages as it turns. Finally, it settles. The flask hums behind them. A single sentence appears across the glass-strewn page. To remember is to risk becoming what was forgotten. The stranger whispers, "What does that mean?" Elio smiles, faint and hollow. It means that remembering comes at a cost. He closes the book, then looks around. These memories, they're not just recordings, they're containers. Each one is holding something unresolved. Sebastiano stares. What if we opened one? Elio doesn't answer, because Aranata already has. One orb now floats free of its pedestal, glowing red, shimmering, and then it breaks. Glass doesn't shatter, it evaporates. And suddenly, the chamber isn't the chamber. It's a battlefield. Sand, blood, smoke, a city burning. Language, not Italian but Aramaic, screamed across dunes, men fleeing with scrolls tucked under robes. A voice speaks, not from a mouth, but from within. You must forget this, it says, or everything will burn again. The illusion collapses. The room returns. Aranata is kneeling, clutching her head. Elio helps her up. What did you see? She doesn't answer, because she's crying, but not from sadness, from recognition. She was there, she whispers. The clergyman's superior, the one who ordered it all. And just like that, they have a new name to find, and another truth to unbury. They leave the vault in silence. Aranata doesn't speak for nearly an hour, her face pale and unreadable, as they retrace their steps through the tunnel. Only once the last brass panel hisses shut behind them does she find her voice again. She was wearing an inquisitor's robe, she says, voice low, but her sigil wasn't from the Venetian branch. It was older. Elio guides her by the elbow back into the main chamber. Older how? Pre-unification, she mutters. Maybe even pre-papal. I saw the seal once on an excommunication writ kept in a private collection in Amalfi. A circle pierced by 4 arrows. Sebastiano exhales, the sign of the splintered eye. The stranger looks between them. That sounds made up. It does, Sebastiano agrees, but I remember it now too. Elio leans against a pillar, cane balanced across both hands, because the memory was sealed away. Until now, according to legend, though some scholars call it heresy, the splintered eye was a sect of rogue theologists in the 12th century. They believed the human soul was composed of overlapping truths, each able to be fractured, examined and reordered. They disappeared after the Third Lateran Council, their writings supposedly destroyed. But a few obscure alchemical manuscripts make passing mention of custodes veritatis fractae, keepers of broken truth. No one ever proved they existed. And yet, Aranata wipes her eyes. She ordered the destruction of not just the society, but every experimental line that led to the Caligo flask. The voice, the vessel, the resonance rituals. She wanted it erased completely. Then why leave the codex intact? The stranger asks. Elio thinks for a moment. You don't leave something like that behind unless you think no one will ever find it again. Or you want it to be found later, by someone specific. Sebastiano eyes the still glowing flask resting inside its travel cradle. Or maybe it couldn't be destroyed. Maybe the truth itself has inertia. Aranata straightens. I think we were meant to find this, but not for preservation. Elio finishes the thought, for closure. That night, they rest inside a forgotten antechamber off the central library tunnel. Dusty cots, lanterns flickering blue, the kind of quiet that's full of held breath. Elio doesn't sleep. Instead, he runs his fingers over the newly retrieved page from the codex, traced onto fresh vellum by Aranata in her steady script. It's a formula, an unfamiliar one, not the Caligo recipe, something adjacent, labeled simply Aqua Videri. He frowns. I've never seen this. Aranata joins him, pouring tea into a cracked ceramic cup because it was locked. That page only revealed itself when the correct resonance tone passed through the room, which we triggered, Elio mutters, when we placed the flask. He studies the formula. Ginger root ash, salt from a freshwater spring, crushed morning glory seed, 2 drops of blood from a fasting subject, and something called echo resin. He tilts his head. That's not a term I've heard. Arnata shakes her head. Neither have I, but based on the glyphs around it, it's not a physical resin, more like a residual signature, from a person, from a truth. The stranger now stands behind them. Wait, what does it do? Aranata answers carefully. If the Caligo flask reveals hidden truths, the Aqua Videri mixture appears to do the opposite. Suppress them? No, Elio murmurs. It lets you see the truth others believe, even if it's false. A beat, so it shows perceived truth. Sebastiano whistles low. That's worse than Caligo. You could use that to control anyone. Convince them of anything. Elio closes the book. Now we understand why the splintered eye wanted this sealed. Caligo was dangerous. This is temptation made liquid. Aranata wraps the vellum. We take it with us. To where? The stranger asks. We've found the codex, the name of the order behind the purge. What's left? Elio's fingers tighten around the cane. We still don't know who commissioned the first counterfeit flask. Could it have been the clergyman? No, he was executing orders. Someone else funded the experiment. Someone who benefited from the society's fall. Someone who's probably still using our methods without understanding them. Sebastiano looks up. Then we need to find the last surviving flask made before the fire. Elio nods. The second tone flask. They all remember the cryptic note from weeks before. Flask of second tone. It hadn't made sense then, but now with the codex revealing layered meanings, it clicks. The Caligo project had multiple prototypes, each one tuned slightly differently. The first was destroyed, the second, lost, rumored to have been taken during the chaos. Aranata unrolls an old alchemical map, one drawn over a faded city plan. At the bottom, 2 crossed flasks, and the letters FV2. Elio traces the corner with his thumb. Florence. The stranger blinks. That's weeks away. Sebastiano smirks. Unless you know someone with an airship. Aranata raises an eyebrow. Do you? He shrugs. I might know someone with an illegal hot air rig repurposed from an old Medici carnival balloon. Elio chuckles softly. Of course you do. The stranger looks incredulous. You're saying we're flying to Florence in a patched-up balloon full of stolen heat sigils and illicit flasks. Aranata sips her tea. It's more dignified than a mule cart. Elio says nothing. He's already thinking ahead. If the second tone flask still exists, if it's still functional, it might carry the last intact memory of the moment everything fell apart. Not just who lit the fire, but why. And once that memory is seen, there'll be no putting it back. By dawn, Sebastiano has made contact with his airship associate, a man known only as Gaspard, who smells strongly of burnt anise and wears goggles indoors like he's perpetually on the verge of combustion. They meet him just outside Rome, in a clearing behind a shuttered monastery, where the balloon lies draped across an old grape arbor like a sleeping animal. It's patched in a dozen places with old carnival banners, faded stars, painted masks, one suspiciously provocative centaur, but the lift mechanism seems solid, and the burner hisses with the confidence of someone who doesn't care about regulations. This contraption is illegal in at least 3 papal states, Gaspard declares proudly, hands on hips. Elio tilts his head. Only 3, we working on 4. They load the crate carrying the second flask, the codex replica, and the Aqua Videri scrolls with extreme care. Aranata weaves a protective spell around the flask using a ribbon made from laminated mulberry paper soaked in sandalwood. It hums faintly, as though grateful. The liftoff is slow but stable. By the time the balloon rises above the olive trees, Rome looks small and old and impossibly distant. The sky is clear. For now, they travel for hours in silence, the countryside slipping beneath them like pages in a dream. Elio sits near the front, wrapped in a grey wool cloak. Renata sits cross-legged with the codex open on her lap, chanting silently. The stranger leans on the basket's edge, watching the horizon. Sebastiano fiddles with Gaspard's altitude stabilization coil, which appears to be an old copper pot stuffed with pine cones and wet salt. "Don't ask questions," Gaspard says with a wink. "Just respect the process." As dusk settles, Elio speaks. "The flask is changing." Renata looks up. "You feel it too?" "Since we left Rome," Elio says, "it's begun to hum in a new tone, higher, constant, like it's aligning." Sebastiano frowns. "To what?" Elio touches the edge of the flask's cradle, to the second vessel. Renata closes the codex. They were made from the same batch of sand, bound with voice imprints from the same subject. They want to reunite. Elio nods. "And if they do," the stranger finishes it, "we'll see what was meant to be seen." They land just before midnight on the outskirts of Florence. Sebastiano's contact is waiting in a horse cart, an archivist named Mirka, who once stole a watermarked prayer from a Vatican well. She drives them through quiet alleyways to a forgotten wing of the Laurentian library, where a single window glows faintly behind a wall of ivy and pigeon feathers. Inside is a hidden archive. Not forbidden, not secret, just unlisted. "We keep what no one wants to admit exists," Mirka says, unlocking the iron gate with a key shaped like a cicada. Fake papal bulls, unwritten dogmas, maps of places the church denies it owns. Renata smirks. "You'd like our codex?" Mirka raises an eyebrow. "I already do. It called to me before you walked in." Ella lets his fingers brush the stone walls. "Where is it?" Mirka leads them down a spiral stair and into a chamber lined with nothing but boxes of glass, some intact, some shattered, some fused with what looks like waxen scrolls. At the far end of the room is a pedestal. Upon it, a flask. It looks nearly identical to the one Elio carries, but there are differences. The neck curves wider, and there's a faint opalescent shimmer along its spine. "Second tone," Mirka says. "Unopened, untested, found in a shipwreck near Livorno. No provenance. We've kept it because it resists categorization." Elio moves to it slowly, like approaching a sleeping animal. He doesn't touch it yet. Instead, he places his flask beside it. The hum between them intensifies, not aggressive, harmonic, then a tone, a single, sustained note, high, and almost painful in its purity. Both flasks glow. A circle of light forms between them, floating above the pedestal, and within it, a scene, flickering, unstable. At first, just faces, then voices, then a room. Elio gasps. "It's the chamber," he whispers. "The night of the fire." They all gather closer. The vision stabilizes. There's Cadro, alive, preparing the flask. Lucian, arguing with someone in a dark robe. Sebastiano, present, holding the catalyst vial. But then, the door bursts open, and in walks another man, tall, bald. Not the clergyman. This one has the seal of the splintered eye embroidered into his cloak. He strides in, knocks the flask from Cadro's hand. Cadro screams. A scuffle. The catalyst spills. The resonance fractures. Fire. The image freezes. Elio is trembling. It wasn't just sabotage. It was a test. Sebastiano stares at the figure. That man. I've seen him before. At the Venetian archives. Years later, using another name. The stranger murmurs. They let him back into public life. Renata's jaw tightens, because no one remembered what he did. The two flasks dim. The circle of light vanishes. Silence. Elio steps back. He wasn't just following orders. He wanted to see what would happen when the elixir destabilized. He designed the resonance failure. Sebastiano grips the pedestal, and now he's gone. Slipped back into the world. Erased. Not anymore, Renata says. Now we know. The stranger asks. So what do we do with that knowledge? No one answers, because the truth is obvious. What's been seen can't be unseen, and what the flasks remember, they remember forever. The vision doesn't fade all at once. It lingers in the air like smoke that refuses to dissipate. Ilio can still hear the echo of Cardro's scream. It vibrates in his ribs. And somewhere in the depths of his mind, the memory begins to rearrange itself, not as a story he was told, not even as something he experienced, but as something finally confirmed. They told me I broke the flask, he whispers. The others say nothing. They said I overfired the annealing. They let me believe my blindness was my punishment. Araneta places a hand on his shoulder because they needed a scapegoat. Helio turns toward the second-toned flask, still softly glowing. They didn't need to kill me, just my memory. The stranger watches him carefully. Do you want it back? Helio doesn't respond right away. Then he reaches for the codex, still bundled in mulberry cloth. If the flasks have preserved these echoes, then the codex must hold deeper layers. Not just memories of events, but intentions. Things not spoken aloud. He unrolls it slowly. As he opens it, a shift occurs, not in the room, but in his perception. The pages no longer shimmer in foreign languages. Instead, the text coalesces into a single line, written in his own handwriting. To remember is to relive. Proceed only if you are willing to bleed again. Sebastiano leans in. That wasn't there before. Elio nods. Because I wasn't ready before. He touches the page. It begins in warmth. Molten glass. He feels it before he sees it. The weight of the blowpipe, the rhythmic turning, the breath expanding into liquid fire. It's the chamber below the scola, before the fire, before everything fell apart. The vision flows not like a dream, but like a full immersion. His senses pulled backward. There's Lucian, muttering incantations into a bone jar. There's Cadro, carefully stabilizing the new flask with an inner coil of sapphire-infused thread. There's Sebastiano, nervous, holding the catalyst too tightly. But then the door opens, and the man with the splintered eye steps inside. He carries nothing, no vial, no tools, just certainty. Elio, unseen in the memory, watches him cross the room. The man touches Cadro's shoulder, whispers something. Cadro recoils. Then the man presses a finger to the unfinished flask. A pulse surges through the room. Cadro screams. Lucian yells something in a forgotten tongue. The flask fractures before it ever sings. Heat surges. The chamber begins to burn. The memory ends. Elio gasps and pulls his hand from the codex. A thin line of blood trickles from his nose. Araneta is beside him, in a flash. You shouldn't have gone that deep. I had to. He wipes his nose. His fingers are shaking. He wasn't just there to sabotage. He was testing response time, observing the fracture point, recording it all. That was no accident. It was data collection. Sebastiano paces, which means someone above him, someone in the hierarchy, was overseeing this entire operation. And if they're still alive, they still have access to the other flasks. Elio finishes. The stranger narrows their eyes. How many do you think there are? Elio turns toward the flasks. If the resonance tones were indexed properly, at least 7. Araneta blinks. 7 tones, 7 flasks, 7 memory echoes, and we've only recovered 2. A long silence follows. Then from the corner of the room, Mirka, the Florentine archivist, clears her throat. I might know where another one is. Everyone turns. It's not complete, she adds quickly. It's fused, melted, but it was found near Ferrara, passed through a Jesuit collection. It's buried beneath an old observatory. I didn't realize what it was until now. Elio stands. Can you take us there? She nods. It'll take a day. Sebastiano mutters. By then, whoever holds the remaining pieces could already be using them. Araneta folds her arms. Using them how? For control, propaganda, memory, erasure. No, Elio says. Not anymore. The stranger tilts their head. Then what? Elio lifts the second flask. It sings gently in his hand. They're trying to rewrite history, not hide it, replace it. Sebastiano's voice is dry. That's worse. That night, as the group prepares to rest, Elio sits alone in a side chamber, holding the codex in his lap and the 2 flasks before him. He doesn't open the pages again. He doesn't have to. He knows what comes next. The person with the splintered eye didn't work alone. He was one finger in a much larger hand. And that hand still moves in the shadows of knowledge, quietly shaping the world's memory like molten glass. As he drifts to sleep, he hears a voice, not in the room, not in his head, but in the flask. It's Cadro. The seventh flask was never finished, the voice says, but the memory it holds never died. Elio's eyes snap open, because he suddenly remembers something else. The blueprint, the one Cadro had etched on his desk the night before he died, the final design, not of a flask, but of a person-shaped vessel, a living memory container. And he remembers now it was modeled after him. Elio doesn't sleep again after that. He sits, rigid in the half-darkness, the codex closed on his lap, the two flasks cradled in silence before him, like twins separated by war and finally reunited, only to remember the reason they were split in the first place. Araneta finds him there just before sunrise. "You heard something," she says, not asking. "I remembered something," he replies. She kneels beside him, from the flasks. "No, from myself." He runs a finger along the spine of the codex. "Before the fire, before Cadro died. If he asked me to sit for him, said he needed my harmonic resonance curve. I thought it was just a test, a calibration for the new flask design. He recorded my voice, my breath, even how I reacted to proximity with raw quartz. He looks up, blind eyes wide and distant. But it wasn't just data, it was a model. He was building something, with me in mind." Renata exhales, a living memory archive. Sebastiano steps into the room, arms crossed. "You think you're the seventh flask?" "I think I always was," Elio says. He lifts one of the flasks from the table and holds it to his ear, not like he's listening for sound, but like he's expecting a response. And it comes. A long, slow note. Faint, familiar. "I hear it," Anata whispers. "That's not one of the tones we catalogued." Elio nods. "It's mine." Historians still argue whether memory can be biologically fused with resonance. Some point to brainwave research done centuries later, others to the use of liturgical chant in medieval healing rituals, where voice and intention merge to reshape physical reality. But the fringe theory Cadro once clung to, long dismissed by more rational alchemists, was that the human body, if infused with the right alchemical frequencies, could become a container of truths too volatile for glass, a truth tester. Elio was the prototype. The stranger enters now, face pale. "You've been carrying the seventh tone all this time." "I think so," Elio murmurs. Sebastiano paces, and no one realized. "Not even me, until now." Renata speaks softly. "What does that mean for your memories?" Elio leans back. "They weren't lost. They were filtered. The fire didn't blind me. It triggered the final seal. My sight was the price." The stranger steps closer. "You've been a walking flask. That's why the others hum around you. Why your touch stabilizes them." Sebastiano nods slowly. "It also explains why the first flask cracked. It couldn't be near you before you remembered." A silence settles. Then Elio stands. He's not trembling now. Instead, he seems centered, stronger. "We need to test it," he says. Sebastiano's eyes widen. "Test you?" "Yes." Renata frowns. "How?" Elio doesn't answer. He moves to the table and uncorks the second tone flask. The vapor swirls gently inside, as though curious. Then he takes a small sip, not of its contents, which remain sealed, but of seawater he's kept in a side vial, touched by both resonance flasks. Sebastiano tries to intervene. Elio, wait. Too late. Elio drinks. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the air changes. Not the room, the air itself. It thickens, not like fog, like memory. Elio is no longer standing in the chamber. He's somewhere else entirely, on a boat. The Adriatic, maybe. The sky above him is streaked with purple and gold. On the deck, someone sings an old Murano work song, something about fire, breath, and the lie of clarity. Elio turns and sees himself. Younger, eyes sharp, hands unscarred. And beside him, Cadro, laughing, alive. "You won't get it right the first time," Cadro says. "I never do, young," Elio replies. The memory shifts. Now a workshop. Cadro holds up a paper. The blueprint. The person-shaped vessel. You'll remember this later, he says. When it's necessary, the scene warps again, now a hallway. The man with the splintered eye stands at the end of it. He's older than before, but his eyes, those haven't aged. They're watching Elio. Still carrying the burden? The man asks. Elio speaks, not aloud. Inside the memory. Who are you? The man smiles. I'm the eraser. The vision fractures. Elio wakes with a start, sweat beading on his neck. Arenata holds him steady. You were gone for 20 minutes. Sebastiano is white-faced. You spoke the whole time. The stranger you spoke in Latin. Perfectly. And something else. Aramaic? Elio blinks slowly. I saw him again. Older, but still watching. Sebastiano asks. Was it him who altered your memory? No, Elio says. He didn't erase me. He preserved me, buried me like a relic. So I could be found later. The stranger swallows. Why? Elio looks at them. For the final test. Later that night, Elio opens the codex again. It no longer shifts. It waits. He places his hand on the page labeled Aqua Videri, and the letters change. Not just into his language, into his own handwriting. Instructions, measurements, personal annotations. To see another's truth is to lose your own. Do not attempt this alone. He looks up at the others. Tomorrow, he says, we go to Ferrara. Sebastiano raises a brow. To find the fused flask. Yes, but more than that. He rests a hand on the 7th flask, on himself. To find the person who turned truth into a weapon. And this time, Elio will remember everything. The ride to Ferrara is slow, even with Mirka's backdoor channels and Arenata's discreet sigils of passage. The old train they board runs on coal, soot and secrets. It groans through the lowlands with aching persistence, as if resenting the weight of its own memory. Elio sits near the window, though he cannot see the countryside flashing past. His fingers rest on the codex, now closed, wrapped tightly again. The 7th flask. His flask is bound in layers of wool and salt-treated silk. It doesn't glow, doesn't hum, but it knows where they're going. Arenata dozes across from him, head tilted, a page from her copied notes falling gently to the floor. Sebastiano sits beside the stranger, muttering about city plans, coded letters, and something he once read scrawled into a forgotten ledger in Venice's Biblioteca Nazionale. 2 words underlined twice, Veritas forged. It wasn't a term he understood then. Now he does. Because if what Elio suspects is true, someone has been manufacturing truth for decades, creating entire memory structures, planting them, letting them grow, and at the center, the fused flask buried beneath the Ferrara Observatory. Ferrara is quiet in the late afternoon light. Too quiet. The city always had an odd relationship with silence. It's a place where knowledge once flourished under the Este Dukes, where libraries rivaled those in Florence. But in the 1600s, it became a city that looked inward. Too many scholars disappeared. Too many towers were sealed for repairs and never reopened. Elio senses it before the carriage even stops. This city is heavy, he murmurs. Arenata nods. It remembers more than it says. They reach the observatory at dusk. It's been abandoned for decades, though some say a Jesuit sect still patrols its outer grounds, dressed in layman's clothing, eyes always scanning. Mirka leads them through a side door, through a half-collapsed greenhouse that once held medicinal herbs. Vines creep along shattered glass. Inside, silence. Dust hangs like mist. Instruments lie broken. A half-burned telescope points directly into the floor. There, Mirka says, pointing to a panel of uneven marble tiles. Below that, Sebastiano kneels, examining the pattern. Not original. Someone laid these in haste. Look here, mortar still carries traces of silver resin. They pry it loose, beneath a chamber no larger than a confession box. And in it, the fused flask. It is wrong, twisted, its neck is melted into itself, like it tried to collapse. The base is bubbled, warped like candle wax left too close to fire, but the inner swirl of vapor remains intact. Elio lifts it with both hands. The instant he does, his own flask begins to hum. The stranger backs away. What's happening? They're aligning. Anita breathes. One finished. One failed, but they were made together. They recognize each other. Elio turns to the others. We have to merge them. Sebastiano grimaces. Elio, one of those is you, I know, and the other is unstable. I know. He places both on the floor, draws a chalk sigil around them, something ancient, older than the society, something he remembers not from study but from feeling. He uncorks his flask first, then slowly the fused one. The air thickens, the sigil glows, and then it begins. The flasks don't break, they don't spark, they fold into each other, not physically, not visibly, but spiritually. The hum becomes a song, not sung by a voice but by memory. They all feel it, pressed behind their eyes. A force that slides into the gaps of thought, stitching understanding where confusion once reigned. And then Elio gasps, because he knows everything. He remembers the night Cadro drew the final flask shape, remembers the phrase etched into its base, Veritas forged, remembers the first test, not in Venice, but in Lisbon, a whispered ritual, a child subject, a result that made the observer weep. And he remembers the woman, the one who wore the splintered eye sigil with pride, the superior of the clergyman, her name, her voice, her face. Elira Valmont, he whispers. Arenata's breath hitches. I've read that name. In a list of sanctioned scholars from Prague, she was exiled. She wasn't exiled, Elio says, voice distant. She volunteered for silence. The merged flask shivers, then releases a small pulse, and a memory takes shape in the room. They all see it. An ancient hall, dozens of flasks lined up on long wooden tables, some whole, some cracked, and Elira Valmont at the center, pointing to a diagram. If we cannot trust memory, she says, we must forge it ourselves and teach the world to believe it. The vision ends, the light fades, the chalk sigil burns itself to ash. The merged flask is dark, and Elio sits still, eyes glazed, hands limp. The stranger shakes him. Elio, Elio, he blinks, then speaks. She's alive. Renata stares. What? She never died. She disappeared. Yes, but not in hiding. In position. Sebastiano frowns. What position? Elio swallows. She works beneath the Vatican archive. She oversees the Department of Forbidden Cartography. The stranger scoffs. There's no such department. Renata nods slowly. Yes, there is. They map memory. They catalogue altered truth. Elio stands. Barely. His voice is quiet. We go there next. Sebastiano's jaw tightens. And then, Elio looks at the flask, now cool and silent. Then we remind her what real memory looks like. The Vatican looms like a memory etched in stone, not a place, but an intention, one designed to outlive flesh, shift history at will, and absorb whatever truth dared to contradict it. By the time Elio and his group reach the Roman outskirts, the city seems quieter, as if it knows they're coming. Rain hangs thick in the air, not falling, just waiting. They don't go through the front. That would be foolish. Instead, Mirka leads them to a narrow aqueduct path, an old service corridor once used by cartographers to move lead plates in and out of the library's scriptorium. Forgotten by most, guarded only by rust and time. Elio runs his hand along the damp stone. The merged flask hangs from a reinforced sling at his side, silent since Ferrara. It hasn't spoken since the merge. Arenita notes. It doesn't need to, Elio replies. It remembers what comes next. The passage opens into a hollow behind a chapel wall, one of those side rooms pilgrims pass daily, never knowing it houses a stairwell beneath the altar. That stairwell leads, predictably, down. Sebastiano lights a lantern. The descent begins. 47 steps. Elio counts them by feel. A platform. Then another door, this one metal, reinforced and far too modern to belong in any 16th century archive. A sigil is carved into the center, an eye pierced in 4 directions surrounded by a spiral of ancient names. Elira's mark, Arenata says. She built this herself, Elio murmurs. Sebastiano touches the surface. It's voice-locked, probably encoded to respond only to resonance. The stranger steps forward, then speak to it. Elio doesn't nod, doesn't prepare, he just sings. A single note, low, clear, carried on the breath of all the memories now stitched into him. The sigil glows, the door opens. Inside, not a room, a gallery. Long, circular, like the interior of a tower laid on its side, and on its walls, maps. But not of geography, of moments, dates, decisions. Names crossed out and rewritten. Some maps are built of thread, others of ash. One appears to be stitched into human hair. Aranata exhales. These are memory forgeries, cartographies of belief. Exactly, comes a voice. They all turn. Elira Valmont stands at the far end of the gallery, wearing a robe the colour of decayed silver. Her hair is white now, pulled back in braids that gleam faintly. Her eyes still the sharp grey of frozen riverbanks. She doesn't look surprised. "I've been waiting," she says. Elira steps forward. "You remembered me." "I never forgot," she replies. "You were my greatest design." He says nothing. She walks slowly toward them. The gallery seems to bend around her. "I knew the seventh vessel would awaken eventually," she continues. "But I hoped it would be after I was gone. History is gentler to the dead." Arenata steps in front of Elio. "You ordered the society burned." "I protected the world from a half-finished truth," Elira says. "One that could destroy lives simply by being seen." Sebastiano scoffs. "You didn't protect anyone. You forged over the memory and made sure only your version remained." Elira looks past him, to Elio. "Do you remember what you saw in the merged flask?" "I remember everything. Then you know I was right." Elio steps forward. "You erased not because the truth was dangerous, but because you couldn't control what it would change." A beat, then Elira's mask slips. "I tried," she says quietly. "I tried to regulate it, contain it, but memory has shape, Elio. It grows, and once seen, it echoes." She gestures to the maps. "This is how I survived, not by forgetting, but by redirecting. Every dangerous moment, every inconvenient truth, I charted it, replotted it." "And what about the deaths?" Arenata asks. "Cadro, Lucian, the children from the Lisbon trial." Elira's face hardens. "Loss is the cost of clarity." "No," Elio says. "That's the lie you sold yourself." He reaches for the flask. "Elira Valmont," he says, voice steady, "you are charged with memory forgery, truth manipulation, and the orchestration of alchemical erasure. I offer you the vessel." She stares at it. "What are you expecting? A confession? That I'll pour my soul into your precious bottle?" "No," Elio says, "just the truth, spoken aloud, before it fades again." She laughs softly. "You haven't changed. Always hoping people want to remember." And yet, she steps closer, looks down at the flask. It glows, faint, like a heartbeat. "Go on then," she says. "Ask your question." Elio inhales. "Why did you choose me?" A long silence. Then Elira replies, "Because you were kind, and I needed the vessel to start from hope." No one speaks. The flask pulses once, and the gallery shifts. Maps tremble, threads unravel, and a voice, Elira's younger voice, fills the room. "Let memory burn. Let the ashes be rewritten. Let only what is useful remain." The spell shatters. Glass on one wall explodes. The stranger shields their eyes, and Elira Valmont begins to weep, not for herself, for the truth she buried, and the one who finally unearthed it. Later, after she surrenders herself to the papal scribes, Elio sits in the gallery alone. The maps are fading. Truth, when returned to its proper place, dissolves illusion. The flask hums in his lap, whole, silent, at peace. And Elio, for the first time in his life, remembers himself, all of him. Rome exhaled slowly in the aftermath, as though the weight of truth, finally spoken aloud, had settled over its ancient bones and soothed centuries of tension. The air felt clearer. Or maybe Elio was simply noticing it for the first time in decades. He stood outside the chapel courtyard, fingers resting lightly on the marble railing, head tilted to the side, the hum of the merged flask. His flask had quieted to a gentle rhythm, not gone. Just calm, as if the vessel no longer needed to speak because everything it once held was now shared. The Arenator joined him with 2 cups of coffee and an arched brow. "You sleep?" Elio gave the softest shrug. I dreamed. Whether it was rest, I'm unsure. Dreams count, she said, handing him the warm cup. They sipped in silence. Behind them, the stranger spoke with a Vatican liaison about Elira's formal confession, worded so carefully it neither implicated nor fully exonerated the institution. A compromise. One that admitted the existence of manipulated memory artifacts, but framed Elira as a lone scholar who went too far. Historians will eat it up, Sebastiano muttered, joining them on the terrace. The tragic genius angles. They won't believe she acted alone, Araneta replied. They'll argue about it for centuries, Elio added, smiling faintly. That's the price of truth. No one knows what to do with it once it's free. He turned back to the city. Below, a procession of schoolchildren walked in pairs along a narrow lane, past fountains older than their nation, past statues whose names had faded from the stone. They laughed, played, unaware of the invisible war fought to protect the memory of their world. You going to stay? Araneta asked quietly. I might, Elio said, but not as an alchemist. I think I'll teach. She smirked. Teach what? How to remember, properly, without fear. She nodded. Good. Behind them, the stranger approached. The liaison says we have a week before the first inquiries start. They want copies of the codex, fragments of the flasks, controlled releases, a narrative. Sebastiano made a face. Of course they do. Truth is fine, so long as it's formatted. Elio shook his head. We give them nothing unearned. The stranger studied him. So what now? Elio turned, placing the flask into a case lined with soft wool and cedar shavings. We protect what remains, not by hoarding it, but by living it. He closed the case, and we rebuild. That evening, the group returned to Venice. Not the glowing, gilded version sold to tourists. The real Venice, fog-wrapped, wind-kissed, humming with the ghosts of artisans and forgotten hymns. The canal outside Elio's shop sang softly under the moon, and the glassblower's tools waited patiently in their usual place, as though untouched by time. Elio ran his fingers along the cooled brick oven. It still bore the scars of old fire, but it would burn again. He lit the forge. Araneta placed the codex replica on a shelf above the workbench, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with a simple wax stamp, a symbol of trust, not secrecy. Sebastiano unpacked old notes, blueprints, and pieces of shattered flasks, arranging them like puzzle fragments along the far wall. The stranger swept the floor, then stopped to stare at the glass sculpture. Elio had made decades ago, a sphere inside a cube, balanced perfectly, clear as breath. I never noticed before, they said. It's not a sculpture. Elio smiled. No, it's a question, and the answer depends who's looking. Days passed, then a week. Elio began shaping again, not memory flasks, not truth containers, but simple vessels, cups, vases, small things that carried light, and people came. Not many, but enough. They brought broken memories, faded documents, things they didn't understand. He didn't fix them, he listened. Sometimes that was enough. One afternoon, a boy arrived with a bottle he claimed purifies seawater. Elio held it, tested the weight, sniffed the rim. It was his design. But older, worn. The boy waited, wide-eyed. Is it real? Elio smiled. What do you think? The boy hesitated. I think it's special. Then it is. He handed it back. The boy left grinning. And that night, Elio added a new tool to his bench. A quill. He began writing. Not formulas, stories. Each night, one more memory. Sometimes his, sometimes not, and sometimes... He didn't even write it down. He just remembered, which, in the end, was all Cadro ever asked of him. Not to fix the past, not to rewrite it, just to carry it forward. The tide was low the morning Elio returned to the lagoon. He walked alone, the hem of his coat brushing puddles that reflected the marble sky. The wind was soft, not the biting salt gusts of winter, but the gentle kind that made shutters sigh open and stray papers dance lazily across the square. He carried no flask, no codex, not even his cane, just himself, and that now was enough. Behind him, Venice stirred in its usual rhythm. Vendors calling out half-hearted prices. bells ringing from San Giorgio Maggiore, pigeons arguing over a crust of focaccia near the canal steps. Life went on. It always had. But under the surface, something was different, remembered. He paused near the edge of the water, beside the mooring post where Cadro once tied the society's skiff. His fingers found the knot etched into the old wood, a mark, small and forgotten, shaped like a circle intersected by a diagonal line. It wasn't a guild mark, it was a promise. He leaned in, whispered, "We didn't forget." The water shimmered briefly, and for just a second the reflection that stared back wasn't his. It was younger, sighted, smiling. Back at the workshop, the others waited. Arenata was assembling a series of stained glass sun catchers, each one shaped like a flask but filled with coloured glass shards instead of memory. "No one can bottle truth," she'd said, "but you can let it scatter and refract, let it glow." Sebastiano was halfway through restoring an old ledger they'd found sealed beneath the Ferrara Observatory. "Some of these names were erased from every archive," he said. "We're bringing them back, even if it's one list at a time." The stranger had taken over the front window, organizing public workshops on how to test water purity, understand sound resonance, and spot a forgery. "If they want to replace history," they said, "we'll just make the real one louder." And the flask, it rested in its cedar-lined case, cool, still, dormant. But Elio knew better. It was listening. Weeks became months. Occasionally, someone would arrive with a whisper of another flask, a cracked vessel found beneath a collapsed chapel, a rumor from Istanbul, a coded letter from Prague, signed only with the letter V. Each time, Elio and the others would trace the lead. Sometimes they found truth, sometimes just echoes, but every time they returned with more clarity, more memory, more story. Historians still argue whether the Society of Glass ever truly existed, whether the Caligo flask was ever real, whether Elira Valmont was a heretic or a martyr, or whether the so-called Archivium Obscura was just a poetic fabrication used by Renaissance mystics to justify their madness. They argue, of course, because the truth is no longer easy to claim, and that's the beauty of it. Ilio doesn't correct them. He simply keeps blowing glass. One foggy evening, a girl walks into the shop. She's maybe 11, sharp eyes, smudged sleeves. She clutches a tiny bottle of green-tinted glass that looks suspiciously like a miniature flask. "I found this," she says. "It makes my dreams louder." Ilio takes it gently, examines it, smiles. "Well then," he says softly, "you must be very brave." "Why?" "Because memory speaks to those ready to hear it." The girl leans in. "Do you think I'm ready?" Elio kneels to meet her gaze. "I think," he says, "that remembering doesn't always mean understanding. Sometimes it just means being willing to try." She nods, satisfied, leaves, and Elio adds her bottle to the shelf, right beside Cadro's old compass. That night he sits in the quiet of the workshop, firelight flickering, pages of his journal open to a new entry. He dips the quill, writes a single sentence. The flask never held the secret. Pauses, smiles. The glassblower did. And so we come to rest. The forge cools, the flasks sleep, and the soft hush of Venetian night drapes over the canals like a velvet curtain. In the workshop, the glass tools rest exactly where they belong, waiting patiently for tomorrow, or perhaps the next day, when the world will again need someone to listen, to shape, and to remember. Elio breathes slowly now. Not because the world is healed, but because the weight of forgetting has finally been lifted from his chest. Outside, water laps gently against the stone steps. A cat stretches across the sill. The bells do not ring tonight. They've done their duty. Everything that needed saying has been said. The flask no longer hums. Its memory has settled. Its truth has been spoken. And so, dear listener, let this final scene melt quietly into your thoughts like warm glass folding under breath. The city fades behind the mist. The last lantern flickers in the window, and all around, the world exudes the peaceful indifference of a place that knows it is ancient, and kind, and deeply flawed. Maybe you, too, carry something like that flask. A truth you've kept sealed, something waiting to be remembered. And maybe, just maybe, it's time, but not tonight. Tonight is for rest. So, Close your eyes now, let the stories dissolve. The alchemist sleeps, the glass cools, and you are safe. Always, sweet dreams.